Hey guys, tonight we begin with the bed. The straw pallet on the swept earth floor and the great curtained bed of carved oak. The family of 7 folded into one warm hollow under a single blanket, and the Lord asleep 3 feet above a servant who lies across his doorway like a living lock. Tonight we ask a simple question, the one your whole body is already asking as you settle in. How did people actually sleep in the Middle Ages? The reality is gentler than you might fear, and stranger than you might guess. They slept crowded and propped half upright, and afraid of the dark in a way we have mostly forgotten how to be. They slept on rope and on straw and on feathers. They shared beds with strangers in the inns along the road, and they said prayers into the black that asked, in plain words, simply to be allowed to wake again. Sleep was not a private thing a person did alone in a quiet room behind a door that shut. It was a crowded, candlelit, half-believing crossing of the night, and almost no one made that crossing by themselves. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what we do here. And let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what hour of the night it is for you. It is always a quiet pleasure to see who is drifting off with us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let us lie down into this together, the way they did. You have just lain down in the year 1290. It is full dark outside the shutter, and full dark inside the room because the light has been put out, and there is no other light anywhere in the world that you can reach for. The bed beneath you is not a mattress as you would know one. It is a sack of straw on a web of rope, and the rope has stretched over the season, and you have sunk a little toward the floor in the middle, the way they always do by spring. You pull the blanket to your chin. Somewhere close in the dark, someone you love is breathing. This is how the night begins. Before we can ask how anyone slept, we have to look closely at the thing they slept on, because in the Middle Ages, the bed was not a piece of furniture you bought and forgot about. It was, for most households, the single most valuable object they owned. Picture it now from the outside, the way a stranger stepping through a low doorway would have seen it. In a poor cottage, the bed might be little more than a heap in the corner, a sack stuffed with straw laid on the swept earth or on a scatter of fresh rushes. In a richer house, it stood as the grandest thing in the room, taller than a man, hung with curtains, carved and waxed and gleaming in the firelight, the one piece every visitor's eye went to first. There was a whole ladder of beds, and where you slept on that ladder told the entire story of who you were. At the very bottom was the floor itself, with a handful of rushes scattered over it, and your own cloak pulled across you for a blanket. One rung up from that lay the pallet, sometimes called a paillasse, which was simply a long sack of coarse cloth stuffed with whatever you could lay your hands on. And what you could lay your hands on depended entirely on your purse. The poorest filled their ticks with straw, with chaff swept from the threshing floor, with dried bracken pulled from the heath, with bean stalks, with moss, with rags. The straw was warm, and at first it smelled of the harvest, of summer fields cut and dried. It did not stay that way. There was no zip-off washable cover here, no mattress protector you could throw in a machine, and certainly no replacing the whole thing for free if you slept on it for 100 nights and disliked it. There was the straw, and there was you, and there was time, and time did to the straw exactly what you would expect. Lie down on such a pallet in your mind for a moment and take stock of it honestly. The good news is that you have a mattress at all, which is more than the man on the bare rush floor an arm's length away can say. The bad news is that the straw inside it was last changed in the spring, and it is now well into the autumn, which is to say that some half a year of accumulated whatever it was has wandered in, lived in, and quietly died in the warm dark beneath you. A fresh straw tick smells of cut summer fields. A 6-month straw tick smells of the inside of a barn, because it is, in every way that matters, the inside of a barn that you have agreed to sleep on. And still you are glad of it, because the alternative is the floor, and the floor is colder, and the floor is harder, and the floor does not even hold the warmth of your own body the way a good thick sack of old straw does. Then came the frame, and the frame is where the real word comes in, the word that gives this whole bed its name. The medieval bedstead was a low wooden rectangle, and across that rectangle, in place of the wooden slats your own bed has now, ran a tight lattice of rope. The rope was threaded through holes bored in the side rails or wound around stout pegs, back and forth, until it made a taut web to hold the mattress up off the cold floor. It was clever, and it was simple, and it had one flaw: rope stretches. Night after night of a body's weight, and the web sagged, and the sleeper sank slowly toward the middle of the bed like a stone settling into a pond. So every so often you took up a wooden tool, a bed key, a kind of lever, and you went around the frame turning and tightening each loop until the web sang taut again and the bed was firm beneath you once more. Now, you have heard, perhaps, that this is where we get the phrase to sleep tight. Tighten the ropes and you sleep tight. It is a lovely story, and you will find it told as plain fact on 100 little museum placards. The honest truth is that the etymologists argue about it, and a good many of them think the phrase came along later and means nothing more than to sleep soundly, tight in the older sense of soundly or properly, the same way we still say to hold something tight. Nobody can prove it either way, and so let us leave it where it belongs, as a story that may be true, and turn back to the rope itself, which we know was real, because the bed keys survive in museums to this day, their wooden handles worn smooth and dark by 1,000 patient turnings. Picture your own hands on that key in the last grey light of an evening, working slowly around the frame, the rope creaking as it draws tight, the small, honest satisfaction of a bed made firm for the night ahead. Above the rope went the mattress, and above that, if you were fortunate, a second softer one, and the softness of those layers was the second great marker of where you stood in the world. A middling household, a yeoman farmer doing well for himself, might have a mattress stuffed with wool or with flock, which was the combed-out waste and the ragged tag ends of the wool trade, lumpy and uneven but warm, and a great improvement on straw. And at the very top of the whole ladder, the thing every soul beneath dreamed quietly about, was the feather bed. A great soft sack stuffed deep with the down, and the feathers of geese and ducks, plumped and turned by hand, deep enough to sink into and half vanish. There is no memory foam here, no pocket springs, no cooling gel layer, and there is certainly no adjustable base that hums up and down at the touch of a button. There is only the patient gathering of feathers, a household saving them year upon year, a bed that took a flock of birds and the better part of a generation to build. You did not order a feather bed and have it left on the doorstep 2 days later in a flat brown box. You built one slowly, the way a swallow builds a nest, a handful of down at a time, plucked from the geese at the autumn killing, hoarded and dried, and at last sewn up into the great soft tick by a grandmother who would not live to sleep many nights on the finished thing. And the feather bed asked for tending in return, the way every good thing does. It had to be plumped and turned and shaken out, day after day, or the feathers would settle and pack flat and hard at the bottom, and you would find yourself sleeping on a deflated sack with all the comfort gathered uselessly at your feet. There was no zip and no machine wash. When the tick grew foul, it was unpicked at the seam, the feathers were aired and picked over by hand, the cloth was scrubbed, and the whole thing was sewn shut again, a long day's labour for a chambermaid. The softness was real, but it was earned and re-earned, over and over, by hands you would never see. That patient building is exactly why beds turn up by name in medieval wills, and few details tell you more about how they were valued. When a man sat down to set out what he was leaving behind him, the feather bed was often near the very top of the list, itemized as carefully and as anxiously as a parcel of land. The best bed, with all its hangings, to the eldest son. The second best bed to the wife. The bedding, the bolster, the pair of sheets, each to a named daughter. We have wills from the 1400s that describe beds in loving, careful, almost tender detail, because a good bed was wealth you could lie down inside, wealth that kept you warm and outlasted you and was meant to. There was no mattress you replaced without a second thought, no furniture written off the moment it sagged. The bed was an inheritance. Think on that for a moment as you lie there now. The thing under you, the thing you will swap out one day with hardly a thought and barely a backward glance, was once the kind of possession a person planned a family's whole future around. A fine feather bed could be worth more than a labouring man earned in a whole year of work, more than his livestock, more than nearly anything he would ever touch, and it could pass down through 3 generations and still be the best thing in the house when the great-grandchildren slept on it. There was no buying a new one on a whim, no upgrading every decade because the firm advertised a better one. You had the bed you had, you mended it and restuffed it and turned it and treasured it, and you handed it on like a name. The very greatest beds were something else again, almost small rooms in themselves. A frame of carved and polished oak, posts rising at the corners, a flat canopy overhead that was called a tester, and curtains hanging all around it that could be drawn shut to make a warm little chamber within the chamber. The full 4-poster, with a stout post planted at each of the 4 corners, was a late arrival, only coming properly into fashion in the 1400s, toward the close of our whole period. Before that, the curtains hung from the ceiling beams above, or from an iron rail, or from a half canopy that sheltered only the head of the bed. The hangings were embroidered, sometimes with the family's own arms and emblems, and they were never only for beauty. They kept off the draughts that crept across every medieval floor. They were believed to hold back the bad air of the night, and, not least, they granted the only real privacy that existed in a house where other people slept in the very same room, because that is the thing to carry with you as we go down into the dark together tonight. The bed was the most valuable thing most people owned, and almost nobody owned it alone. The straw pallet held a whole family in its hollow. The great feather bed held a husband and a wife, and, very often, a servant lying somewhere close at hand. A bed in the Middle Ages was the household's treasury and its bedroom and its birthing room and its deathbed all at once, and it was almost never a place a person went to be by themselves. Every soft crackle of the dying fire across the room was a small reminder that you were not alone in the night and were never meant to be. So let us climb down off this ladder of beds and into a real one. Let us go first to the smallest house in the village, where the whole world fits inside a single warm hollow, and see who is breathing there in the dark beside you. Picture yourself now inside a peasant cottage in the Cotswolds, the year 1290, the fire gone low, and the one room of the house dim and orange at the edges. There is one bed. Not one bed each, Not one bed for the couple and another for the children down a hallway, because there is no hallway, and there are no other rooms, and there are no children's beds. There is one bed, or in the very poorest houses, one wide pallet laid on the floor, and into it goes the entire household, every soul under the roof. You and the man or the woman you married, and the children, all of them, and quite often a grandparent whose own parents are long in the churchyard, and on the bitterest of nights perhaps a newborn lamb or a sickly piglet too precious to leave shivering in the byre. The whole of your family's nighttime world is the width of a single mattress. The smell reaches you first, before anything else, and it is worth lingering on, because it is the truest detail of all. Wood smoke that has soaked into the thatch and the wool and the very skin of everyone in the room. The warm animal smell of bodies that are washed perhaps a handful of times a year. The dry dustiness of the straw in the tick, the lanolin smell of the wool blanket that has not been laundered since nobody can quite recall. There is no clean cotton here, changed twice a week, no laundered pillowcase, and there is certainly no fabric softener leaving everything smelling faintly of a mountain meadow that exists only on the side of a bottle. There is only the deep, layered, lived-in smell of people and animals and smoke and time. And to you, lying there, it is not foul at all. It is simply the smell of home, of warmth, of safety, of everyone present and accounted for in the dark. You lie down in an order, and the order is not random, and once you see it, you cannot unsee the quiet love stitched into it. The smallest children and the frailest go into the warm middle of the bed, and the very old grandmother, whose blood has gone thin and slow and cold with the years, goes there too, packed into the centre like the soft, warm crumb at the heart of a loaf. The grown ones, the parents, the sturdy older children, take the cold outside edges, where the draught comes hunting under the door and creeps across the floor and finds the bed. You are, in the most literal sense the words can carry, your children's blanket. Your own back is turned to the cold so that their small fronts can face the warmth. This is a kind of love that needs no words at all, and is performed wordlessly every single night of the year, simply by the question of who lies down where. No one announces it. No one is thanked for it. It is just done, the way the sun is just risen, the warm bodies arranged around the precious ones, the way you might bank coals around something you mean to keep alight. The bedding is thin, and it is shared down the whole row of you. A single blanket of coarse, heavy wool, drawn over everyone at once, or perhaps 2 blankets if the household has had a good year. You sleep in your shirt, the same long undershirt you wore beneath your clothes through the whole of the day, because a nightgown is a separate garment you do not own and cannot spare the cloth to make. In the very poorest houses you sleep in nothing at all, and the only warmth in the entire world is the warmth coming off the body of the person pressed against your own. There is no hot water bottle filled at a tap, no electric blanket with a dial, and the only thermostat in the house is the simple number of bodies under the wool. On a cold night, more bodies is warmer, and a crowded bed is a blessing rather than a burden, and a family that has lost members to the churchyard sleeps colder for it in more ways than one. There is no central heating purring away in the walls, no radiator ticking under the window, no dial you can turn up a degree when the cold wakes you. There is wool, and there is straw, and there is the heat of the people you love, and that is the whole of the warmth in the world tonight, and you ration it the only way you can, by lying close. It is worth pausing here, because to a modern ear all of this can sound like simple misery, and it was not, or at least it was not only that. The historians who study how people slept in the medieval and early modern world make a careful point about this, and it deserves to be heard in plain words. Privacy, the idea that a person ought by right to sleep alone in a room of their own, behind a door that latches, is a very recent invention indeed. For most of human history, across most of the world, sleeping alone was the strange thing, the unlucky thing, the thing that happened to the sick, the dying, the imprisoned, and the very rich, who were rather pitied for it. To sleep in a heap with the people you loved was the ordinary human night. Now, set the modern flinch aside for a moment and feel it the way they felt it. You are wedged warm between the people you would die for. The dark presses against the shutters and cannot get in. Every breath rising and falling around you is one more body keeping the cold at bay, one more proof that the family is whole. It is worth saying, too, that the bed itself was not only a place to sleep, but very nearly the only warm and comfortable place in the entire house, and so it was the place the family gathered. There was no sofa drawn up before a television, no second room with a softer chair. There was the cold floor, the hard bench, and the bed, and on a winter evening, once the work was done, the whole family climbed into the bed simply to be warm together. The children told their tales there, the grandmother dozed there, the mending was done there by the last of the light. The bed was the living room and the bedroom and the nursery and the sick room all folded into one warm rectangle, because it was where the warmth was, and in a cold house the warmth decides where life happens. You did not go to bed only to sleep. You went to the bed to live the part of the day that the cold would otherwise have taken from you. And so a child raised in such a house grew up never once in their life having slept alone, and would have found the very idea strange and a little frightening. To them, the warm press of a brother's back and a sister's cold feet and a mother's slow breathing was simply what the night was made of. The silence and solitude of a modern bedroom, one person to a room, a door that shuts, a whole quiet floor of the house given over to a single sleeper, would have struck a medieval child not as luxury but as a kind of terrible loneliness, the sort of thing that happened only to the cast out and the grieving. The closeness had its costs, of course, and we should be honest about them, because they were real. A bed shared by 7 was a bed shared with whatever else lived in the straw, and something always lived in the straw. Fleas. Lice. The bedbugs that came creeping out of the warm timber once the bodies had heated the wood. The tick had to be emptied and restuffed with fresh straw now and again, but fresh straw cost labour and time, and the old straw always stayed in a little too long. You scratched in your sleep and thought no more of it than you would think of the weather. There was no spray for it, no exterminator to call, no fresh sealed mattress delivered to the door in a box. It was not pleasant, but it was wholly ordinary, and a thing that happens to every single person you have ever met stops being a private shame and becomes merely the texture of being alive. And the closeness meant there were no secrets in a one-room house, none at all. The marriage bed and the children's bed were one and the same bed. A husband and a wife had no private chamber to slip away to, no door to close, only the dark and the turned backs of sleeping children and the unspoken understanding that everyone learns in such a house, the quiet courtesy of not noticing, of granting one another a privacy that the walls could not. Children grew up knowing, in a plain and unstartled way, where babies came from and where the old went, because both of those things happened in the very bed they slept in. Birth and death, love and grief, and the simple animal warmth of a winter night, all of it unfolded in the same warm hollow, lit only by the last red eye of the coals across the room. And there is a strange honesty in that when you sit with it. A modern child grows up behind a closed bedroom door, shielded from the great facts of life until the world chooses to explain them, or until a screen does it badly. A medieval child grew up wedged into the middle of all of it, and so new, plainly and without drama and without shame, that people are born and grow old and couple and die, because all of it happened within arm's reach, in the bed, in the dark, in the ordinary course of the nights. They had no privacy, and the price of that was that nothing could be hidden. But the gift of it, perhaps, was that nothing had to be hidden either, and a child learned the shape of a whole human life simply by lying in the warm middle of one and listening. So picture the moment the last of them settles. The latch checked, the fire banked, the children already gone heavy and slack and breathing slow with sleep. You feel the small bare foot of a child wedged against your spine, the warm slow breath of your wife or your husband against your shoulder, the dry old hand of the grandmother where it has come to rest on the blanket. And though there is one thin blanket and a sack of straw 3 weeks past changing and something biting quietly at your ankle, you are, by every measure the night actually cares about, rich. You are warm enough. You are surrounded. You are not alone in the dark, and you never have been, and the thought of being so would frighten you far more than the dark itself. This is the bed at the bottom of the whole ladder, the straw and the bodies and the one thin blanket, and it is poorer than anything you have ever slept in, and warmer, in its way, than anything too. Hold that warmth, and let us climb the social ladder now, up and out of the one-room cottage, into a great house where the bed grows softer and the sleeper, strangely, grows lonelier. Picture yourself now in the year 1230, in the private chamber of a lord, high up in a stone manor or in the keep of a small castle, in a room that 2 centuries earlier would not have existed at all. For in the oldest great houses, everyone, the lord and the lowest servant alike, had slept together in the hall. But by your day the lord has withdrawn from the common floor. He has had a chamber built for himself above the hall, reached by a winding stair, and this room is called the solar, and it is a thing almost unimaginably luxurious. A room, for sleeping, for 2 people and the few who serve them. You lie now in the great curtained bed at the very centre of it, and the distance between this bed and the one we just left in the cottage is the distance between 2 whole worlds that happen to share a county. Feel the layers of it beneath you and above you. Under your body, the feather bed, deep and yielding, turned and plumped that very afternoon by a chambermaid's careful hands. Beneath the feather bed, a firm wool mattress. Beneath that again, the taut web of rope strung across the frame. Over you lie linen sheets, the only genuinely soft cloth that most people of the age would ever touch in their lives, and over the sheets wool blankets, and over the blankets a coverlet of fur or richly worked and coloured cloth. Under your head and shoulders runs the bolster, a long firm cylinder of feathers laid clean across the whole width of the bed, and upon that a pillow or 2, and all around you hang the curtains, drawn shut now against the night, so that you lie inside a small warm tent of embroidered cloth, the carved canopy, a soft darkness somewhere above you, the firelight reduced to a single thin gold thread where the curtains do not quite meet. This is as comfortable as a human being could be made in the 13th century, and it is comfortable indeed. There is no central heating, no thermostat on the wall, no goose-down duvet ordered from a catalogue with next-day delivery. But there is fur and feather and fire and 4 walls of warm cloth, and that is real wealth turned patiently into warmth. And yet, for all that softness, you are not alone in this room. You are never alone in this room. Down on the floor, at the foot of your great bed, or upon a low truckle bed that rolls out from beneath your own like a drawer pulled open, or on a hard bench set square across the doorway itself, a servant is sleeping. A body servant, a chamberlain, a trusted man or woman of the household, and they sleep there at your feet for two reasons that the whole age took entirely for granted and never thought to question. The first reason is service. If you wake in the deep of the night wanting wine, wanting the chamber pot drawn nearer, wanting the fire built up against the cold, wanting anything at all, you do not rise and fetch it yourself. You speak into the dark, and a person rises up from the floor to attend you. There is no light switch by the bed, no glass of water already poured on a nightstand, no thermostat you nudge with a sleepy hand. There is a human being on the floor, and that human being is, in a sense, the age found perfectly natural, your light switch and your water and your warmth. The second reason the servant sleeps there is older and harder, and it casts a longer shadow. The servant across the threshold is a living lock. A great man had enemies, in a world without police and without law that reached reliably into the night, and a man asleep is a man who can be murdered in his bed. And so the most trusted servant of all slept between the Lord and the door, his own body laid down as the last thing standing between his master and whatever might climb the dark stair. To sleep soundly, a powerful man needed another man to sleep lightly at his feet. The comfort of the feather bed was bought, in part, with the watchfulness of the body on the floor. So consider the strange arithmetic of this single room. 3 feet above the boards, on feathers and fur and linen behind drawn embroidered curtains, lies the lord of the manor. 3 feet below him, on a thin pallet or a hard wooden bench, on the cold floor, wrapped in his own rough cloak, lies the servant. The same room, the same night, the same darkness pressing on the same shutter, the same wind finding the same cracks. The whole medieval order of the world is laid out vertically in that one small space. Status measured not in coin for the moment, but in inches of softness and in feet of height up off the floor. The higher you sleep, and the softer, the greater you are. It is very nearly the plainest diagram a society ever drew of itself, written every night in the dark, in the simple geometry of who lay where. And do not imagine the servant resented the floor or thought it beneath him, because to sleep in the Lord's own chamber was a mark of high favour and deep trust. There were dozens of others who would have given a great deal to lie on that cold board at the foot of the great bed, because the man who slept nearest the Lord was the man closest to the Lord's ear, the Lord's secrets, the Lord's gifts. It was, in its strange way, the medieval equivalent of the corner office, except that the office was a hard plank by a door, and the promotion was the right to be woken at any hour of the night to fetch wine. The body servant slept lightly and uncomfortably and counted himself a fortunate man, and by the measure of his world, he was right too. Feel the room around you, then, as the Lord feels it from inside the curtains. You cannot see the servant down there in the dark, but you can hear him, the soft, regular sound of his breathing rising from the floor, and that sound is a comfort to you, the way a locked door and an alarm panel are a comfort to a sleeper now. You have no deadbolt, no chain, no glowing keypad by the entrance, no camera watching the stair. You have a faithful human being asleep across your threshold, and his presence is the whole of your security system, and you trust it with your life every single night, because there is nothing else to trust. The great bed itself was never only for sleeping, and this is the part our own age forgets most easily of all. The bed of a powerful person was a stage. It was where you received visitors of importance, propped up against the bolster with the curtains looped back on their hooks, granting an audience as if from a small, soft, private throne. A great bed announced your standing to everyone who set foot in the chamber. the way a fine carriage might in a later age, or a corner office with a view in our own. The hangings carried your coat of arms. The sheer scale of the thing, the dark gleam of the carving, the weight of the cloth, the months of labour stitched into the curtains, all of it said, without a single word being spoken, here lies a person of consequence. The bed was furniture, and it was advertising, and it was politics, all at the same time, and a visiting lord read another lord's bed the way you might read his bank balance. It is hard to imagine now, conducting your most important business from your bed. We have built a sharp wall between the bedroom and the world, between where we sleep and where we work and meet and decide things. And we would think it strange and a little improper to receive a visitor of consequence while propped against our pillows. The medieval great household drew no such line. The bed was the grandest seat in the grandest room, and so it was where the grandest things were done, the petitions heard, the alliances discussed, the messengers received. To be admitted to a great man's bedchamber and to stand at the foot of his curtained bed was to have arrived at the very centre of power, and the bed sat at that centre exactly because it was the most magnificent and the most expensive thing the household owned. So feel the strangeness of the place where you are lying. It is the warmest, softest, safest, and most private spot for a mile in any direction, and it is also a kind of throne, and a kind of office, and a kind of stage, and a servant sleeps at the foot of it, and visitors have stood where his pallet now lies. There is no separating the comfort from the meaning here. The great bed is where you are most yourself and most on display at once, most at rest and most a lord. And that doubleness was simply woven into what a bed was, at the top of the ladder, in a way our own neat and divided houses have entirely forgotten. Scholars have long argued over just how private these chambers really felt to the people who lived in them, and it is a genuine and an interesting debate. Some historians point to the solar as the very birthplace of the idea of privacy itself, the first time in long centuries that an ordinary great household carved out a room where two people might be alone behind a closed door. Others answer that the room was forever full of servants coming and going, dressing the lord, banking the fire, emptying the pot, sleeping on the floor, and that the kind of solitude you take entirely for granted, a whole room to yourself with the door shut and no one else breathing in it, was a thing almost never had by anyone at all in that age, not even by a king. The honest answer, as it so often is probably both at once. The solar was the most private space in the whole building, and it was still a space you shared with a servant at your feet every single night you ever slept in it. So picture it now, the curtains drawn, the fire low and red, your own slow breathing inside the warm cloth tent, and below you, somewhere down in the dark, the soft and faithful breathing of the person who guards your sleep with the simple offering of their body. Even at the very top of the ladder, on feathers, behind curtains, in the only private room for a mile, you do not cross the night alone. And perhaps that is the quiet lesson of the Lord's chamber, that all the wealth in the world bought you a softer bed and a warmer fire and a finer set of curtains, but it did not buy you what we would call solitude, and it did not even occur to anyone to want it. The very greatest person in the house still slept within arm's reach of a servant, still woke when that servant stirred, still lived every hour, even the sleeping ones, in the company of others. To be alone was not the prize. To be attended, surrounded, served, and safe was the prize, and the Lord had it in fuller measure than anyone, his sleep watched over, his fire kept, his door guarded by a faithful breathing body on the floor. From here, let us go down the stair and into the hall and watch a whole great room change its nature when the light dies. Now come down out of the solar, down the winding stair, into the great hall of a baronial house in the year 1180, and watch a room change its entire nature as the daylight fails. By day, the hall is the beating heart of the whole household. It is where the Lord dines at the high table up on the raised dais, where the business of the manor is done, where guests are feasted and quarrels are settled, and the long trestle tables run down the floor while the whole company eats together in noise and smoke and firelight. But the hall has a second life, and that life begins the moment the evening meal is cleared away, and it is the life that almost no painting and no tapestry ever shows you. By night, the great hall becomes a dormitory. The grand public room of the daytime folds itself, every evening, into a crowded sleeping floor. Watch closely how it happens, because it is a small marvel of making do. The trestle tables are not furniture in the way you think of furniture. They are simply long boards laid across folding trestle legs, and after the evening meal those boards are lifted apart and stood up against the walls, and all at once the floor of the hall is open and empty, a wide space of stone or timber strewn with rushes. And out come the pallets. Sacks of straw, rolled and stacked along the walls through the day, are unrolled now across the floor, and the great mass of the household that is not grand enough to own a chamber of its own beds down here, together in the wide open room. The grooms and the kitchen lads, the men of the guard, the lesser servants, the poor relations and the hangers-on that every great house carried along with it, all of them spread their pallets on the floor of the hall and lie down in long, uneven rows. The light, such as it is, comes from one place only. In the centre of the floor, or against one wall in the newer built halls, the great fire burns slowly down through the whole of the night, never quite let go out, a low red eye in the dark giving off more glow than flame by the small hours. And there is no other light at all. There is no switch beside any door, no soft green standby glow from a dozen devices, no phone lying face up on the floor beside a sleeping man and lighting his cheek a ghostly blue. There is the fire, and there is the dark, and there is the slow breathing of 30 people who have eaten and drunk their fill and now sleep on the very ground where they ate it. The smoke drifts up to the high black rafters and finds its slow way out through a louvre in the roof, and the whole vast room smells of wood smoke and of roast meat gone cold, and of 30 unwashed sleeping bodies, and to you, lying in it among the others, that smell is simply the smell of being safely indoors, of the day done and the doors barred and the household whole. And here, too, where you lie tells the world precisely who you are, only now the ladder runs flat and sideways across a floor instead of climbing up through a house. The most favoured servants, the ones the Lord trusts and likes and means to keep, bed down nearest the fire, in the warmth and the wavering light, up near the high end of the hall below the dais. The lowest of all, the newest kitchen boy, the man nobody yet has any particular reason to favour, gets the far end down by the great doors, where every opening of the door lets in a cold knife of night air, and the rushes underfoot are always a little damp, and the fire is only a distant promise of warmth he cannot reach. A whole career of loyalty and good service could be read in a single glance across that sleeping floor, simply by noting how near to the fire a man had earned the right to lay his pallet. Promotion in a medieval hall was measured in part in feet of distance from the draught, and a man who had crept a yard closer to the warmth over 10 years of service had climbed about as far as such a man could climb. So picture yourself as one of those men now, unrolling your pallet on the rush-strewn floor of the hall, somewhere in the middling rows, neither by the warm fire nor down in the cold draught by the door. You sleep among perhaps 30 others, and you know every one of them, their snores and their smells and their habits in the night, the way you would know the people of a small village, because that is what a great household was, a small village gathered under one enormous roof. There is no privacy here, and no one expects any, and no one wants any. You would no more ask for a room of your own than you would ask for a horse of your own or a manor of your own. The floor of the hall is where men of your standing sleep, and to sleep there among your fellows is simply your place in the world, as fixed and as familiar as an old coat. There were the small irritations, of course, the very same ones that come of any crowd of people sleeping in one room. The man beside you snored like a hog at the trough. The dogs came nosing through the rushes in the dark, hunting for warmth, and dropped scraps, and one of them would as likely as not settle its heavy weight against your legs and flatly refuse to be shifted. The fire smoked when the wind sat wrong in the louvre and you woke coughing in the dark. Somebody, somewhere down the long black length of the hall, talked in his sleep every single night, the same half-words muttered over and over. There was no white noise machine to drown any of it out, no pair of soft foam plugs for the ears, no separate quiet room down the corridor to escape into. There was the hall, and the 30 of you in it, and the long patient give and take of a great many people learning, year upon year, how to sleep in spite of one another, and in the end, somehow, because of one another. And there was a deep safety in the arrangement that more than paid for the snoring and the dogs. A lone man sleeping in a wild, dark country was a man at the mercy of whatever the night brought, the cold, the thief, the wolf, the things people feared in the dark. A man sleeping in a hall full of his fellows, behind a barred door, by a watched fire, was as safe as a man of his age could be. The crowd that cost you a peaceful night's sleep was the very same crowd that guaranteed you would wake to see the morning. There is no burglar alarm here, no bolt you trust, no phone to call for help that would come. There is the company, and the barred door, and the dying fire, and the plain animal safety of being many together in one warm room, while the dark does what the dark does outside. So let the hall settle around you one last time before we leave it. The talk dies down, man by man. The last cup is set aside. Somebody banks the great fire so it will hold its glow till morning. The dogs find their places among the warm bodies. And one by one, the 30 of you give yourselves up to sleep on the floor where you ate, wrapped in cloaks, heads on rolled garments, the firelight reddening the rafters far above, the whole great household breathing slow together in the dark, and the hall holding all of you safe inside it, the way it has held every night before this one, and will hold every night to come. There is something to notice about how light a sleep this floor must have been, and the medieval mind would not have found it strange in the least. You slept among your fellows, half-dressed or fully dressed, your boots perhaps still laced on your feet, your few small possessions tucked beneath your body or clutched to your chest, because a hall full of sleeping strangers and half-strangers was a hall in which a careless man might wake to find his purse or his good knife quietly gone. You woke at every cough, at every shifting body, at every dog that padded across the rushes in the dark, searching out a warm place to curl among the men. And yet, to a person who had never once in their whole life slept any other way, this was not hardship and it was not loneliness. This was company. The snoring of 30 men was the sound of the household alive and whole and gathered around you. And a man forced to sleep all alone in such a hall would have felt the silence pressing on him as a kind of danger. Then the dawn comes, grey at the Louvre and grey under the door, and the whole transformation runs backward. And it is the rhythm of it I want you to feel in your own chest. The pallets are rolled and stacked away against the walls. The trestle boards come down off the walls and are set back on their folding legs. The rushes are kicked and raked back into some kind of order, the fire is fed and wakened, and by the time the Lord descends his stair, the hall is a dining room once more, with no sign anywhere that 30 men slept on its floor only a few hours before. A medieval great hall breathed like this every single day of its long life. Dining room to dormitory and back again to dining room. The same stone space worn smooth by both uses at once. There were no spare rooms in even the very grandest of houses, because the idea of a room that did only one single thing, that sat empty and waiting all day for one purpose, was an idea that almost no one in the age could yet imagine, let alone afford. You live, most likely, in a house where the bedroom is for sleeping and the kitchen is for cooking, and each room holds its one job and waits patiently to be used. The medieval hall would have found that an extraordinary waste of good space and good warmth. One great room did everything by turns, dining and judging and feasting and sleeping, because building and heating a room was dear, and a room that sat idle was a kind of foolishness. The hall worked all day, and then it worked all night, and it never once stood empty. And that is why no painting shows the beds, because the beds were only ever there in the hours when no painter was working. So picture the hall now in the deep middle of the night, the work of the changeover long done, the trestles gone and stacked, the pallets in their long rows across the floor, the one fire glowing low and red at the heart of it all, and the rafters lost in darkness high above, and the slow tide of 30 sleeping breaths rising and falling and rising together in the warm and smoky dark. From here, let us step out of doors, away from the household entirely, and onto the open road, where the bed you must sleep in tonight belongs to no one you have ever met. Picture yourself now a traveller on the road in the year 1390, a merchant perhaps, or a pilgrim, footsore and saddle-sore as the light begins to fail, scanning the way ahead for a roof to take you in for the night. You come at last to an inn, and you are glad of the sight of it, because to be caught out on the open road after dark was no small or trifling thing in that age. You pay the host, his coin, you eat whatever is set in front of you in the smoky common room, and then you are shown at last to your bed. And here is the part of the night that no modern traveller is in any way prepared for. The bed is not yours. You are going to share it. This was simply how an inn worked, and it is worth saying it plainly and slowly, because it sounds so strange to our ears now. An inn might have only a room or two set aside for its guests, and in each of those rooms stood several beds, and into each bed went not one weary traveller, but 2 or 3 or even 4. There are accounts that describe rooms holding a dozen beds, with each of those beds holding 3 or 4 people, the whole chamber a packed and breathing field of snoring strangers. There is no private room with a key card here, no quiet single room with blackout curtains, and there is certainly no checking in alone to a wide, soft bed with a folded towel and a small foil-wrapped chocolate left waiting on the pillow. There is a bed, and there is whoever else the host has decided will be sleeping in that bed tonight. And tonight, as it happens, that is you. So you climb in beside a stranger. A man you have never once laid eyes on before, and most likely will never lay eyes on again. A fellow traveller set down there beside you by the simple plain arithmetic of the house being full and the night being cold and the bed being wide enough, in the host's judgment, for 2. He might be a wool merchant heading for the staple, a pilgrim bound for some distant shrine, a peddler with his pack, a clerk, a soldier walking home from a war. You exchange a few low words in the dark, or you exchange none at all, and then you settle yourself down to sleep an arm's length from a person whose name you may never even learn. There even grew up over time a quiet etiquette for it, an unwritten gentle code of how a person ought to share a bed with a stranger and keep the peace through the night. You lay still. You did not sprawl across the middle. You did not drag more than your fair half of the blanket to your own side. You did not turn and twist and kick and fight the mattress. You kept to your own edge, you minded your own breathing, and you granted the stranger pressed beside you the very same small mercies that you quietly hoped for in return from him. Think of what a strange thing this is, set against the way you travel now. When you stop for a night on a journey today, you are handed a key, and behind the door it opens is a room that is yours alone for the night, a bed no one else will touch, a lock you control, a private bathroom, a little card asking whether you would like fresh towels. The medieval traveller had none of that and would have found the very idea bewildering. There was no private room, no lock that was yours, no quiet, and definitely no front desk apologizing for the inconvenience. There was a host who took your coin, a bowl of whatever was in the pot, and a space in a bed that 3 other tired men were already warming. The privacy you take for granted when you travel simply did not exist at any price, because almost no one in the whole world had ever imagined wanting it. And yet the inn was, for all its crowding and its fleas, a place of real welcome and real safety, and that is the thing to hold on to. To reach an inn at dusk was to be off the dark road, behind a door, among people, with a fire and food and a roof, and that mattered more than any amount of privacy. The road at night was where you might meet robbers, or wolves, or simply the cold, and any of the 3 could end you. So the crowded shared bed was not a hardship the traveller endured. It was a deliverance the traveller was thankful for, a warm, crowded harbour at the end of a hard day, and a man who grumbled about sharing a bed would have been thought a soft and an ungrateful sort of fool by everyone else in it. It was not, by any honest account that survives, a restful way to spend a night. You slept beside the snores and the grunts and the heavy, restless turning of a person you did not know and had no reason yet to trust. There were bedbugs in the cheaper inns, and lice and fleas, the same small lodgers that haunted nearly every bed of the age. Only here in the inn they were strangers' fleas as well as your own, freshly arrived from the last 3 travellers to lie where you were lying. And there was the constant low worry over your purse. A man on the road carried his money on his own body, for there was no other safe place to keep it, and a bed full of strangers was a bed in which a sleeping man might be very quietly and very thoroughly robbed before the dawn. So you slept with your purse tucked beneath you, or knotted tight into the breast of your shirt, or wound around your wrist on its cord, sleeping light, one part of your mind always on guard over your worldly goods. There was no hotel safe behind the desk, no card you could telephone someone to cancel, no insurance to make you whole again if you woke to find your purse cut away and gone. There was only your own wariness and a knot pulled tight and luck. You slept, in a real sense, with one eye open, the way a wary animal sleeps, half of you sunk in rest, and half of you keeping watch over the small handful of coins that stood between you and disaster on the road. There was no app on a phone to freeze your account, no traveller's cheque, no card that meant nothing to a thief. Your wealth was metal, and metal in a purse, and a purse on a sleeping body in a bed full of strangers, and so a part of you never quite slept at all. Women on the road met this same world with fewer choices still, and the customs of the inn bent a little to make room for them. A woman very rarely travelled alone, but when a married couple came together to an inn, the 2 of them were usually given a bed to themselves, even if it meant the host turning some grumbling single man out of that bed and sending him to crowd in with the others to make the room. There were sometimes a few beds, or a curtained-off corner, kept apart for women travelling under a proper escort. But the underlying truth of the place held just the same for everyone who walked through its door. The bed was a shared and a public and a half-open thing, and a night spent at an inn was a night spent in close bodily company with whoever else the long road had happened to wash up under the very same roof on the very same evening. If you have ever read Chaucer, you already know the shape of this world without my drawing it. The pilgrims gather at the Tabard Inn in Southwark, a chance-met company of total strangers thrown together for the road to Canterbury. And at the end of that first day on the road, very likely, more than one of those pilgrims is sharing a bed with another. There is a real tenderness hidden inside all of this, and it is easy to miss it under the snoring and the fleas and the worry. So let me draw it out before we move on into the dark. A shared bed kept you warm, and warmth on the road in the autumn or the deep of winter was not a small comfort, but very nearly the whole difference between a night a body could bear and a night that left you wretched and ill by morning. The body of the stranger lying beside you was, whatever else it might have been, a steady and an honest source of heat through the cold hours. And there is something quietly moving in the trust, the whole arrangement quietly required, this nightly ordinary act of lying down defenceless beside a person you had no particular reason on earth to trust, in the simple, shared and unspoken faith that we are all of us only travellers, all of us only tired, all of us only trying to cross one more night and reach the safety of the morning. The road was full of strangers, and at the end of each day spent walking it, you handed a few of those strangers your sleep, the most defenceless thing you owned. And mostly, night after night, year after year, across the whole of the Middle Ages, the strangers proved worthy of it. Most travellers were simply tired, simply cold, simply trying to get home or get to market or get to the shrine, and a bed full of strangers was, far more often than not, a bed full of decent, weary people doing one another the small kindness of lying still and sharing the wool. The road taught a hard wariness, but it taught a quiet faith in ordinary people too, and the two rode together in the same shared bed every night. And there was a kind of fellowship in it that we have quietly lost. When you stay somewhere on a journey now, you may pass a whole night and a whole morning without exchanging a single word with another soul. The key handed over by a screen, the door closing on your own private silence. The medieval traveller had no such silence to retreat into. He ate at a common board with strangers, he drank with them, he heard their news of the roads ahead and the prices at the next market, and then he slept beside them and rose with them and parted from them in the morning, a little less a stranger than the night before. The shared bed was the last act of a shared evening, and for all its discomforts it knit the travellers of a whole country loosely together, each one carrying news and faces and small kindnesses on to the next inn down the road. Feel it now, lying there. The unfamiliar weight of another man shifting and settling on the rope frame beside you. The strange and grudging comfort of another warm back in the cold and unfamiliar dark. The purse knotted tight and pressing into your hip beneath you, and somewhere below in the house, the last of the fire dying in the common room, and the long open road still waiting for you in the morning. Now let us leave the road, and the strangers in their crowded beds, and turn to the most intimate bed of all, the one a person shared not with the night's chance company, but with a single chosen soul for the whole length of a life. Picture yourself now upon your wedding day. The year hardly matters, because what we are about to see happened in every year of the Middle Ages, in cottage and in castle alike. The feasting is done, the long day is spent, the guests are loud and warm with drink, and now you are being brought to the bed. And the bed, on this one night of all nights, is not a private thing in the least. In a great many places, and across a great many centuries, the whole wedding party came along with you, laughing and singing, and not a little drunk, and saw the couple put to bed together with their own eyes, and a priest came with them to bless the very bed before the night could rightly begin. That blessing had a proper name, the Benedictio Thalami, the blessing of the marriage bed, and it tells you how seriously the age took the matter. A priest would come up to the bedchamber and say prayers over the bed and over the couple already lying in it, sprinkling holy water across the coverlet, asking God to make the union fruitful and the sleep within it safe and the whole marriage blessed and lasting. The bed was sanctified, made holy, the same way a church was sanctified or a field was blessed at the spring planting, because what was about to happen in that bed mattered to a great deal more than the two people lying there in it. To us, the thought of the wedding guests and the parish priest all crowding cheerfully into the bedroom is almost unthinkable, a complete collapse of everything we mean by the word privacy. To them, it was right and proper and expected. A marriage was a public fact, a joining of two families and their lands and their futures, and the bed where that joining was made real was a public place on the night that it was made. For the married bed was, above and beyond everything else it was, the legal and the dynastic center of the entire world. It was the place where the marriage was consummated, and consummation was not some private afterthought, but the very thing that made the marriage binding in the eyes of the law and the church, sometimes witnessed, sometimes solemnly sworn to afterward, the single hinge on which whole inheritances and great alliances between houses turned. It was the place where heirs were conceived, and the place where those same heirs were born, the one bed faithfully serving the whole long arc of a family's continuance down the years. And it was, in its time, the place where you yourself would most likely die, very probably in that selfsame bed, with your own grown family gathered solemnly around it, just as your noisy wedding party once had gathered. There was no maternity ward to be born in, no hospice to die in, no separate clean room set aside for either great threshold of a life. One bed held the beginning and the long middle and the end. The child conceived in it was born in it, and, if the years proved kind, would grow old in it and die in it in their own turn, and pass it on. Lie in that bed for a moment and feel the whole shape of a life pressing in around you. We spread our great moments out across many places now. You are born in a hospital, you are married in a hall, you sleep at home, you grow ill, and you die in another building entirely, each threshold of the life handed to its own specialist room with its own bright lights. For them it all happened here, in this one bed, under this one roof, and so the bed was thick with memory in a way no single room of a modern life ever is. The same boards had heard the first cry of a child and the last breath of a grandfather. The same hangings had been drawn for a wedding night and pulled back for a death watch. To lie down in it was to lie down in the gathered weight of everything a family was. Think for a moment what that does to the whole meaning of a bed. The thing you climbed warily into at the close of each ordinary day was not merely the place where you happened to sleep. It was the place your own life had first begun, and the place your children had each begun, and the place you knew with a quiet and unflinching certainty where you would in all likelihood one day end. No wonder, then, that the bed appears in the old wills with such tender and anxious care, the best bed left to a named heir, the marriage bed, and all its hangings handed down through a family like the truest of heirlooms, because in a real sense the bed was the family. It was the physical stage on which every single generation had played out its arrivals and its partings. A good bed could be older than the marriage it now held, older than the grandparents asleep at its edges, a deep, soft repository of a whole family's long memory of itself, soaked through with births and deaths and the ordinary nights in between. consider how differently we hold a bed now, you and I. A bed today is a thing you buy in an afternoon and replace without ceremony when it sags, a thing wheeled out to the curb on a grey morning when the new one is delivered, forgotten before the van has turned the corner. For them, that same bed was the most personal monument a family owned, more lasting than any of the people who slept in it. And to be left the marriage bed in a will was to be handed the very heart of the household, the very place where the family had been made and remade across the generations, flesh and blood, birth after birth. It is a strange and a moving thought that the most ordinary object in the house, the one you flopped down onto exhausted at the end of every plain day, was also the one your descendants would weep over and quarrel over and treasure long after you were gone. And so a person climbing into that bed at night was climbing, whether they thought of it or not, into the centre of their own life and their family's whole story. You lay your head where your mother had laid hers, where your children would lay theirs, where you yourself would one day lie for the last time. The bed held you the way the family held you, on every side, in the past and in the years still coming, and there was a deep settled comfort in that which no amount of softness alone could ever give. To lie down in the marriage bed was to lie down inside belonging itself. By the close of the Middle Ages there were also gentler customs taking shape around the bed and around courtship in some country districts, though here I must tread carefully and tell you honestly where the firm ground ends. In parts of the northwest of Europe, in Wales and in Scotland and in the Low Countries and in Scandinavia, there grew up a practice that later ages came to call bundling. A courting couple, not yet married but promised to one another, might be allowed to share a bed for a single night, fully clothed, sometimes with a stout board laid down the very centre of the mattress to keep them apart, sometimes each of them sewn into a separate sack, so that they could talk and keep warm together through a long cold night without anything further passing between them. I should be plain with you that the rich and detailed evidence for this comes mostly from the centuries just after our own period, the 15 and 16 and 1700s, and that careful scholars allow only that its roots reach back into the late medieval countryside, no further. So hold it lightly in your mind, as a custom only just taking its shape at the very edge of our age in the last of the candlelight. But the impulse beneath it is purely medieval and purely and gently human. Fuel was dear and houses were bitterly cold, and a warm bed was simply the warmest room in the world. And so courtship, like every other part of life, found its careful way under the blankets, hedged about with boards and sacks and the watchful half-open eye of a mother lying awake in the very next bed. There is something almost tender in the picture once you set aside the strangeness of it. A young couple, promised but not yet wed, lying clothed and divided in a cold, dark room, allowed to talk through the long hours of the night, to whisper, to learn one another's voice and humour and silences, with a board between them and a mother breathing close by. It is courtship without privacy and without danger, conducted in the one warm place in the house, watched over and hedged about and yet real for all of that. There was no slipping away alone, no door to close, no quiet evening with a screen between you. There was the shared bed, the board, the dark, the whispering and the watchful house, and somehow love found room to grow even there, as love always does in whatever room it is given. And it tells you something true about the whole age, that even courtship happened in a bed full of rules and eyes. Nothing private, nothing alone, nothing unwatched. The bed was the centre of the household, and the household was always present. And so even the most intimate beginnings of a marriage took place half in company, under the eye of the family, in the warm, crowded dark where everything else in a medieval life took place as well. What I would have you carry away from all this is the sheer weight that a single bed could be made to hold. Not the weight of the bodies in it, though it held those too, night after night. The weight of meaning. The married bed was a sacrament and a courtroom and a birthing room and a deathbed, and in between all of those grave and weighty things, it was simply the warm, dark place where two people lay down at the close of each plain, ordinary day and listened in the dark to one another breathe. There is no deeper intimacy than that anywhere in human life, and the medieval world understood it through and without apology, blessing the bed with holy water in one breath and willing it carefully to a beloved daughter in the next. So picture it now, the blessing said and done, the wedding guests gone home at last into their own night, the candle pinched out, the curtains drawn close if you are grand enough to own a bed that has them, or the one rough blanket pulled up to the chin if you are not. Two people, newly married, lying in the dark, at the very start of a shared life that this same bed will hold faithfully from end to end. And from the marriage bed, let us pull gently back and look at something that everyone in this whole story did, lord and labourer and stranger and bride alike. Let us look closely at the simple act of going to bed, the small, quiet ritual that closed every medieval day. Whoever you happened to be in the Middle Ages, the night had a definite shape to it, a small ritual of getting yourself across from the waking world into the bed, and tonight let us walk slowly through that ritual in just the order they did. There was no rushing it, because there was nowhere else to be, and almost nothing else to do once the light was gone from the sky. The day simply ended when the daylight ended, and going to bed was less a decision a person made than a quiet surrender to the dark. First, there was the matter of undressing, or, just as often, of not undressing at all. If you were poor, you very likely did not undress in any real way, or you loosened only your outer garments and slept in the long linen shirt you had worn all the day beneath your clothes, because that shirt was your day clothes and your night clothes both at once, and a separate nightgown was an indulgence of good cloth you could not begin to spare. If you were rich, there was a small ceremony to the undressing. A servant helped you out of your heavy gown and your hose, and you were dressed in a clean nightshirt kept for that one purpose, and perhaps a soft close cap to keep your shaved or close-cropped head warm against the chamber's chill. The undressing of a great person could take a fair while, and it was done by other hands than your own, and it was quietly watched. There was no slipping out of your clothes alone in a locked room and pulling on whatever you pleased. Even the act of getting ready for bed was a thing performed in company with an audience of servants. Then there was the chamber pot, plain and necessary and entirely universal. It was kept beneath the bed or in a corner near at hand, because no one at all was going to step out into the freezing black of the yard at midnight if it could in any way be helped. There were no flushing pipes down a tiled hallway, no bathroom with a light that came softly on at the touch of a switch, no plumbing of any kind. There was a pot somewhere in the dark, and you found it by memory and by careful feel, and in the cold of the morning a servant or a wife or a child whose turn it was carried it out and emptied it. It is not a romantic detail, and I will not dress it up as one, but it was a universal one, running all the way from the king's curtained garderobe down to the cotter's clay pot in the corner, and no night was ever got through anywhere without it. Then the light, and the matter of the light, is one of the truest differences between their nights and yours. At the bedside there burned a small flame that had seen you safely to your rest. A rushlight, perhaps, a single peeled rush soaked in old kitchen fat that gave a low and a wavering little glow for a quarter of an hour at a time before it needed tending, or a candle of tallow that smoked and sputtered and smelled faintly of mutton, or, for the rich alone, a clean, bright candle of beeswax standing in its holder. And then, before sleep took you, the flame was put out. This was not only thrift, though a rushlight was far too precious a thing to waste in burning away over a sleeping man who could not see it. It was caution, hard caution, learned the worst way. You slept in a house built of timber and thatch and dry straw, and a flame left carelessly burning beside a sleeper was exactly how houses and the families inside them were lost in the night. So the light went out, pinched between two wet fingertips or smothered carefully under a little metal cap, and the true dark came down over everything, the complete and total dark of a world that held no other light anywhere at all. Feel that dark for just a moment now. Not the grey, faintly glowing, never quite dark of a modern bedroom, with its standby lights and its street lamp leaking gold around the edge of the curtain and its phone breathing softly on the nightstand. The real dark. The dark in which you cannot see your own hand held up before your own face. The dark that they lay themselves down into, willingly, every single night of their lives. And in that dark, the ears took over from the eyes, and the night became a thing you listened to rather than a thing you saw. You learned the sounds of your own house in the dark, the way you know the back of your own hand, the particular creak of the one loose shutter, the settling of the timbers as the day's warmth left them, the small ticking of the cooling fire, the wind finding the same gap it always found. There was no low hum of a refrigerator, no distant murmur of traffic, no glow and buzz of a phone charging on a table. There was only the house and the weather and the breathing bodies, and a person lying awake in the dark read all of it like a familiar page and knew at once when a sound did not belong. The night, too, was longer than any night you have ever known, and that is hard to feel from where you sit. In the depth of winter, the dark could hold for 16 hours together, far more time than any body could sleep. And so the medieval night was not the brisk 7 hours you aim for between an alarm and an alarm. It was a great long stretch of darkness that had to be got through somehow, slept through in part, lain awake through in part, prayed through, listened through, endured. There was no scrolling a bright screen to pass a wakeful hour, no lamp to switch on and a book to read, no warm kitchen to wander down to. To wake in the deep of a medieval night was to lie still in the total dark and the total quiet and simply wait, with your own thoughts and your own fears and the slow breathing of the others, for the far-off grey of the morning. For the fortunate, the bed itself had been warmed against the cold before they reached it. A covered metal pan filled with glowing embers, a warming pan on a long wooden handle, was passed back and forth between the cold sheets to take the worst of the chill off them before you climbed in. The embers kept safe inside the closed brass so that nothing could catch and smoulder. It was a small luxury, and a deeply, bodily pleasant one. The whole difference between sliding into a bed that bites at your skin with cold and sliding into one that has been made to feel almost alive and waiting with warmth. The poor warmed their beds the only way the poor ever could, with their own bodies and the bodies of the family pressed in beside them, and lay shivering and curled tight until at last the wool held the heat in and the bed grew kind. There was no flicking on an electric blanket 20 minutes before bed, no heated mattress with a dial for each side, no warm air sighing from a vent in the floor. There was the brass pan of embers for the few who had one, and for everyone else there was simply the slow, patient business of warming the bed with the heat of your own living body, and the small, unspoken comfort that the cold sheets always, in the end, gave in and grew warm. There was, for some, a last small act before sleep, gentler than a charm and quieter than a prayer. A mother might move once more around the dim room, settling a blanket back over a child who had kicked it off, feeling a forehead in the dark for fever, checking the latch one final time, banking the last of the day's small tasks. The work of the house did not end at a fixed hour the way a working day ends now, with a clock and a closing door. It simply wound down into the dark, task by task, until there was nothing left to do but lie down, and the line between the last chore and the first moment of sleep was as soft and as blurred as the failing light itself. And then there was the strangest part of a medieval night to a modern sleeper, the thing that would surprise you most if you could lie down among them, the position itself. They did not, by and large, lie flat. They slept propped up, half sitting, the head and the shoulders raised high upon the great bolster and the heaped pillows above it, the whole body inclined and rising rather than laid out flat the way that you are very likely lying right now. Part of this was simply the shape of the bolster itself, that firm fat cylinder running the full width of the bed and lifting everything that rested above it. But part of it, and this is where it grows interesting, was belief, genuine and serious medieval medical belief about the body and the dangers of the night. The physicians of the age held firmly that to lie flat upon your back through the long night was a dangerous thing to do. They thought that lying flat let the rheum, the cold and wet humours that gathered in the head, flood backward and downward and pool in the body where they had no business pooling, choking the sleeper, breeding foul dreams, even, the very worst of them warned, inviting a sudden stroke in the dark. To sleep half upright, propped and inclined, was to sleep healthily, to let the body's fluids settle as they properly ought to settle. Now, you and I both know there is no flooding room, no cold humour pooling in the chambers of the skull, and that the medieval picture of the inside of the body was mistaken in very nearly every single particular. And yet there is a small irony here worth a quiet smile in the dark, because sleeping somewhat propped up does in plain fact ease certain perfectly real things. It eases the breathing of a person with a heavy cold or a weak chest. It eases the discomfort of a full and heavy medieval stomach. It eases the sour burn of a large late meal sitting ill. They arrived at thoroughly sensible advice for entirely and gloriously the wrong reasons, the way the age so often managed to do, and a person propped carefully upon their bolster against an imaginary tide of pooling rheum was, quite by happy accident, sleeping rather sensibly indeed. So picture yourself settled now, half sitting in the dark against the great soft bolster, the light just this moment put out, and the smoke of it still faint in your nose, the warmth of the pan fading slowly out of the sheets, the breathing of the household, or of the stranger, or of the wife or husband beside you, now the only sound left in the whole room. The day is fully and finally closed. The dark is complete. And it is precisely into that complete dark that the medieval mind brought its deepest fears. Now we come to the part of the night that the Middle Ages feared the most, and to feel it properly, the way they felt it, you must first set down one thing that you carry without ever noticing you carry it. You are quietly used to the idea that sleep is safe, that the bed is the safest place in the whole house, that nothing comes for you in the dark, that the dark is simply empty, an absence and nothing more. The medieval sleeper did not have that comfort to lie down with. For them, the dark was not empty at all, and the threshold of sleep was the threshold of another and a far more dangerous country, and the thing they feared waiting on the other side of that threshold had a name, an old name, worn smooth with use. They called it the Mare, and here is the thing to understand before we go further. You lie down at night, sure, somewhere deep beneath thought, that the dark of your room is empty, that nothing watches, that sleep is the safest hour of the day. The medieval sleeper lay down with the opposite certainty, that the dark might not be empty at all, that something might come, that the moment you let go of waking you crossed into a country where you were not in charge and not safe. To them, sleep was not a retreat from the dangers of the day. It was a venturing out into the dangers of the night, defenseless, with your eyes closed and your body still. No wonder they prayed before they let go. No wonder they hung iron at the bed. Not a horse. The word has nothing whatever to do with horses, though the confusion between them is itself very ancient. The Mare in the Old English tongue, the Mare in the Norse of the North, was a spirit, a creeping and a malevolent thing that came to a sleeper in the deep of the night. And what the Mare did was specific, and it was the very same story, told in the very same shape, across the whole of northern Europe for long centuries. The Mare slipped into the chamber through the dark, unseen and unheard. It climbed up onto the sleeping body, and it settled itself there, crouched and crushing upon the sleeper's chest, pressing the breath slowly out of the lungs while the sleeper lay frozen beneath it, unable to move so much as a single finger, unable to cry out, unable to wake fully, awake and aware and wholly helpless under the terrible weight of the thing that sat upon the chest. Sit with how that must have felt, because it is the buried root of a word that you yourself use without a second thought. When the Mare rode a sleeper through the night, you had suffered a mare ride, a nightmare. That, precisely there, is where the word comes from, the literal mare of medieval terror, the chest-sitting, breath-stealing spirit, dragged forward across 1,000 years of telling into the small harmless word you reach for, now to mean nothing more than an unpleasant dream. But there was nothing harmless at all about the original. The Mare was blamed for far more than only the crushing weight on the chest. It was said to tangle and to knot the hair of the sleeping into matted elf locks that no comb on earth could ever part. It was said to slip out to the stable and ride the horses hard through the night, so that the poor beasts were found in the grey morning lathered white with sweat and trembling on their legs with exhaustion, ridden into the ground by something that no one had seen come or go. A whole night's strange small misfortunes, the tangled hair and the spent horse and the crushed and breathless sleeper, could all be laid together at the feet of the Mare. Now here is the part where the distant past reaches forward across the centuries and lays its hand on your own shoulder, and it is one of the most extraordinary things in this whole long story of the night. We know, now, exactly what the Mare was, or rather, we know with certainty what real experience it was describing, because it is an experience that still happens, today, in your own century, in your own bedroom perhaps, to a sizable share of all the people who have ever lived. It is called sleep paralysis. As the body crosses the border between deep sleep and waking, the conscious mind can come awake while the body is still held fast in the deep muscle stillness that sleep lays over it, the stillness that stops you from acting out your dreams. And so you surface up into full waking awareness, unable to move a muscle, unable to speak a word, sometimes with a heavy, crushing pressure settling on the chest, and very often with the overwhelming, hair-raising, bone-deep certainty that there is a presence in the room with you, something near, something close, something on you, watching. It is harmless in the body's own terms. It passes off in moments. And it is, without any argument, one of the most purely frightening things that a human body can do to itself in the dark. And so every culture on the face of the earth has given that figure on the chest a name and a story. The medieval North called it the Mare. Pause on that for a moment, because it is worth feeling the full weight of it. The thing your distant ancestors feared most in the whole of the night, the thing they hung iron and stones and prayers against, the thing that named our word for every bad dream, is a thing your own body can still do to you tonight in your own safe and well-lit sanctuary. You have central heating and a deadbolt and a glowing phone within reach, and your body does not know or care about any of it, and on some random night between deep sleep and waking, it can still pin you flat and put the old weight on your chest and fill the dark corner of your room with a presence that is not there. The Mare never left. We only changed the name and stopped believing in it, and the experience went on exactly as before. So the medieval terror was not foolishness, and this matters. It was a sound and a reasonable response to a real and a frightening thing, made by people who had no other way to explain it. They were not stupid, and they were not simply credulous. They felt, with their own bodies, an experience that is genuinely terrifying, and they reached for the only explanation their world could offer, a malevolent spirit in the dark, and then they did the sensible thing and tried to protect themselves against it. You would have done exactly the same in their place. So would I. Strip away 600 years of medicine, and the Mare is waiting for every one of us, just as it waited for them. So step now back into the medieval chamber, knowing the one thing they could not possibly have known. A man wakes in the dead middle of the night and finds that he cannot move. There is a weight pressing down upon his chest. There is a presence in the dark room with him, a nearness, a watching thing, and he is certain of it with a certainty far deeper and older than any thought, certain that something is there, sitting upon him, pressing the very life out of him. He cannot cry out for his wife. He cannot lift his own hand from the blanket. He has no word for sleep paralysis, no physician to come and tell him gently that his mind has only woken a few moments before his sleeping muscles will, that there is nothing there, that it will pass. He is only the story that everyone has always told, the story his grandmother told and her grandmother before her, and so he knows, he simply knows, the way he knows his own name, that the Mare has come for him in the night. And when at last it passes off, when his limbs come slowly back to him and the weight lifts away from his chest and he can breathe and move and weep into the dark at last, the terror does not pass off with it. Because now he knows the thing is real, he has felt its weight with his own body, and he knows past all doubting that it will come for him again on some other night. And so people armed their beds against the Mare, much the way you might bolt a door against an intruder. The charms against the Mare were many, and they shifted and changed from one valley to the next, but they shared a single underlying logic running beneath them all. Cold iron was protection against the things of the old dark, and so a knife or an open pair of scissors might be laid down in the bed itself, or set across the threshold of the room, iron being hateful and barring to the unquiet spirits. A stone with a natural hole worn clean through it, a hag stone, a holy stone, was hung upon a cord at the very head of the bed, for it was widely believed that such a stone, looked through, would reveal and would repel the unseen things that crept in the dark. Salt was scattered at the door. The sign of the cross was made carefully over the bed and over each sleeping body in it before the light was put out. Some hung dried protective herbs above the bedhead, some whispered charms that were half prayer and half spell, the old folk magic of the countryside and the newer faith of the church braided tightly together in the dark, the way the two so very often were, with no one feeling any contradiction in it at all. I should say plainly that the particular charm differed greatly from one place to the next, and that a great deal of what now survives in writing was set down only later, so we hold the fine details of it lightly and gently. But the fear beneath them all was real, and it was universal, and the impulse behind every single charm was one and the same. You set a charm against the Mare for the very same reason that a frightened sleeper today might leave a light burning, or sleep with the radio murmuring low, or keep the bedroom door just so. The thing feared has changed its name and its shape, but the gesture has not changed at all. The small ritual of arming the dark against itself, of doing something, anything, so that you do not lie down wholly defenseless before the night. The iron knife and the night light are cousins, 600 years apart, and they answer the same old fear in the same old way. Picture it now, in your own dark chamber. The iron knife laid cold and bare beneath the pillow, the hold stone turning slowly on its cord in the draught from the shutter, the sign of the cross made over the children's foreheads before they sleep, small, careful defences set up afresh each and every night against a terror that, in the plain light of the next morning, no one could ever quite explain, and no one could ever quite forget. But the Mare was not the only thing abroad in the medieval night. Outside the chamber, out in the churchyard and the dark lane, the dead themselves did not always lie still in their graves. To understand a medieval night fully, you have to understand that the boundary between the living and the dead was thin, and that after dark it grew thinner still. You did not lie down each evening in a world where the dead were safely and finally gone, sealed away in the past and packed down under the churchyard earth. You lay down in a world where the dead were near at hand, where they often had unfinished business among the living, where they might rise up and walk, and where the long, dark hours of the night were precisely and exactly when they were thought to do it. And this was no superstition of a few frightened peasants huddled at the edge of the village. It ran clean through the whole of society, top to bottom, written into the very prayers of the church, and told over again by the fire in the great hall, a settled and a serious and an entirely respectable feature of how the whole world was understood to work. The dead who walked were called revenants, the returned, the ones who came back, the restless dead. A revenant might be a soul caught fast in purgatory, suffering there and unsatisfied, returning to the living to beg for the prayers and the masses that alone could speed it onward to its rest. It might be the unshriven, a person who had died all at once and unprepared, with their sins unconfessed and their account unsettled, and so could not lie quiet in the ground. It might be one of the unburied, or one buried wrongly or in unhallowed earth. Or it might simply be one of the wicked who could find no peace and wished none on anyone else. And the revenant might come to the living for comfort, or it might come bearing a warning, or it might come, in the darker tales, for plain vengeance. Medieval England kept its own true tales of dead men who had risen up out of their graves and wandered the lanes by night, of corpses that had to be dug up and dealt with by frightened villagers before the parish could sleep easy again, of the unhappy dead pressing close around the warm houses of the living all through the dark. These were not idle ghost stories told to thrill a child. They were set down and recorded as true by serious and educated monks in their chronicles, because the line between this world and the next was genuinely understood to be porous and thin, and never thinner than after the sun was down. So lie there now, in your own bed in the deep of a medieval night, and let the dark be what it was to them. You know, the way you know the names of your own children, that somewhere out beyond the wall is the churchyard, and that in the churchyard lie people you knew, people who died with things unfinished, and that the night is the hour when such people do not always stay where they were laid. You have no streetlight throwing a safe orange glow across the lane, no porch lamp, no torch you can sweep across a dark corner to prove that nothing is there. You have a wall, and beyond the wall the dark, and in the dark whatever the dark holds, and no way at all to look and be sure. The not knowing is the whole of the fear, and the night gives you nothing but not knowing. It is hard for us to feel this now, because we have banished the dark so thoroughly that we have forgotten it was ever an enemy. We light our streets and our rooms and our screens, and the night for us is just a quieter, dimmer version of the day, a thing easily pushed back at the touch of a switch. For them, the dark was a true country with its own dangerous inhabitants, a place the living gave back to the dead each evening when the light failed, and stepping out into it after nightfall, even to cross the yard, took a small breath of courage. The boundary they felt between the lit safe house and the dark, dangerous world outside, it was sharp and real, in a way no modern person has ever quite felt, because for us the switch is always within reach. So consider now, lying here, what it actually meant to lie down at night inside a belief like that one. The dark beyond your shutter was not merely the absence of the day's light. It was the very hour when the unhappy dead drew near to the houses, when the churchyard down the lane was not a safe place for any living foot to tread, when a knock at the wall, or a scratch at the shutter, or a sudden cold draught crossing the room might be something a great deal more than the wind. You could not see one single thing beyond your own walls. You had no way on earth to know what moved out there in the lane in the dark. And you carried always in your mind a whole quiet population of the restless dead, any one of whom might, on any given night, come close to where you slept. To sleep at all in a world like that was a small daily act of courage, or else a small daily act of faith. And faith is exactly and precisely the thing they reached for in the dark. For against the whole terror of the night, the Middle Ages had one great and central defense, and that defense was prayer. The church had given the day itself a shape of prayer that ran right up to the very edge of sleep, and the last office of the whole day, sung or said softly as the daylight failed, was Compline, the completing, the prayer that closed and sealed the day. And the words of those night prayers were not vague or soft or general. They were aimed, with a great and deliberate precision, at exactly the fears that we have been speaking of here tonight. The night prayers asked God to defend the sleeper from all ill dreams, to guard them through the hours from the terror that walks abroad in the darkness, to tread down underfoot the enemy that prowled and hunted in the night. The great night psalm, the one that everyone knew, spoke of not being afraid of the terror by night, nor of the thing that moves unseen in the darkness, and ordinary people knew its rolling cadences by heart, the way you know the words of a song you have heard your whole life through. These were the words a person actually fell asleep saying, out loud or under the breath. Not as you or I might mumble half a remembered rhyme on the edge of sleep, but as a true and a necessary shield set up deliberately each night between the soft sleeper and the hard dark. Say them slowly to yourself now, the sense of them if not the words, the asking to be kept from ill dreams, the asking not to fear the terror by night. There is nothing in them of hype or fright. They are calm, and they are sure, and they are old, and they were meant to be said in exactly the half-asleep voice you are drifting into now, a steady murmur into the dark that asks for nothing more than to be kept, and to wake, and to be kept again the night after that. And the prayers had their physical companions, small holy objects set out carefully against the night. Holy water might be kept in a little bowl on the windowsill, or by the threshold of the door, and sprinkled at the four corners of the room before sleep, for it was firmly believed that no evil and no unquiet thing could cross over a line of it. A candle that had been blessed by the priest at Candlemas might be kept by and lit again in sickness, or in fear, or in the worst of the dark. A simple wooden cross hung on the wall over the bed, the smooth worn beads of a paternoster, a string of prayer beads, told slowly through in the dark, each single bead a small repeated plea sent climbing up into the black, until at last sleep came down and took the half-finished prayer gently from the moving lips. There were no nightlights here glowing softly in a child's room, no comforting low hum of a great city that never fully sleeps, no pale glow of a screen close at hand to push the worst of the dark back to a bearable distance. There was the prayer, and the holy water drying on the sill, and the cross a darker shape on the dark wall, and the one small, fragile candle, and the deep and the very human hope that they would all, together, be enough to see you through to the light. There is a child's prayer that you may well know yourself, the small old one that asks, "If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take." It is younger than our own period by some way, but its very bones are pure medieval, because it says straight out loud the one thing that sat quietly under every medieval night. To go to sleep was, in a real and not at all a poetic sense, to entrust yourself wholly to the dark and to God, with no firm certainty at all of waking again in the morning. People died in their sleep, as people have always died in their sleep, but in a world with no medicine able to explain how or why, every single sleep carried that one faint cold shadow with it down into the dark, the shadow that this might be the last, that the soul might quietly slip its moorings and away in the night. And so the prayer said at the bedside was never only a shield against the mare and the walking dead outside. It was also a settling of accounts, a small nightly handing over of the whole self to whatever it was that held and ruled the dark, a quiet way of saying, up into the blackness above the bed, I am ready, if this is to be the night, and please, if it is your will, let it not be. There is no smoke alarm on the ceiling here, no monitor by the cradle, no number to call if the breathing in the dark goes wrong. There is the prayer, and there is the morning, and between the two of them lies the long, uncertain dark, crossed on faith alone. And so the bedside prayer carried a weight that our own bedtimes have entirely set down. It was not a soothing routine. It was the real and serious business of putting your soul in order before you let go of the day, every single night, against the genuine chance that you might not wake to take it up again. Picture it now, the prayer said and done, the holy water drying slowly on the sill, the cross a darker shape against the dark wall, the children gone quiet at last in the middle of the bed. The fear has been named, every part of it, and the fear has been answered, and so a person can let go now and sink down at last towards sleep, having done all that could be done by any mortal soul against the long night. And from that hard-won and fragile peace, let us turn at the last to how the learned of the age thought a night ought properly to be slept, and then to the slow grey first light that finally brought it to its end. There was, whether you would believe it or not, a whole science of sleep in the Middle Ages, a careful body of learned advice about exactly how a person ought to go about sleeping, and it is worth ending our long night with it, because it shows the medieval mind reaching, with the greatest seriousness and with entirely the wrong tools in its hands, toward the very same questions that you and I still ask of the dark today. How long should I sleep? On which side ought I to lie? Is it better to sleep after eating or before? They had firm and confident answers to every part of it. It all began, as everything in medieval medicine began, with the humours. The learned held that the whole body was governed by 4 fluids, the 4 humours, the blood and the phlegm, and the yellow bile and the black bile, and that good health was simply their proper balance, and that sickness was their imbalance, one or another grown too strong. Sleep, inside this whole picture of the body, was not idleness at all, not wasted time, but active and necessary work that the body quietly performed upon itself in the dark. During sleep, they believed the body's own inner heat drew gently inward and cooked the food waiting in the stomach, concocting it, they said, transforming the raw food into pure nourishment, much the way a low-banked fire reduces and thickens a pot left over it through the night. Sleep rested the senses. It settled and rebalanced the four humours, and it let the great slow work of digesting the whole day's eating run its proper course. To sleep well was, in this view, to digest well and to keep the four fluids in their right and even harmony. And to sleep badly was to throw the whole delicate inner engine of the body out of true and to invite in sickness. From all of this there came a whole regimen, a settled set of rules for the sleeper, and the most famous of them by far was set down in a long and popular poem called the Regimen of Salerno, the Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum, which was copied out and translated and quoted right across the whole of Europe for centuries on end, the nearest thing the medieval age ever had to a runaway best-selling book of health advice. And its advice on the matter of sleep is wonderfully, almost touchingly specific. It tells you to sleep around 8 hours in the night. It warns you, sternly and at length, against ever sleeping in the daytime, holding firmly that naps bred only idleness and sloth, that they soured and rotted the humours, and that they left a person heavy and dull and ill for the rest of the day. There is no afternoon power nap here, no gentle permission to recharge yourself with 20 quiet minutes on the sofa, no app to track your sleep score and chime approvingly. The day was made for waking and for work, and the night alone was made for sleep, and to muddle the one with the other was held to be a sure and a foolish way to court real sickness. It is a curious thing to set their rules beside ours. We chase our sleep now with apps that score it and rings that measure it and dark blue light filtered from our screens, and we are told, just as sternly, when and how long to sleep. They had no instruments and no numbers, only the long watching of bodies across the generations, and yet they too laid down firm and confident rules, and they too were sure they had it right. Every age believes it has finally understood sleep. Every age is partly wrong. The medieval physician with his humours and the modern one with his sleep cycles are doing the same human thing, peering hard at the great daily mystery of why we must lie down and lose ourselves for a third of every life, and trying to make sense of it. But the most particular advice of them all, the single rule that the regimens returned to again and again with the greatest confidence, was about which way a person ought to lie in the bed. You were to begin the whole night sleeping upon your right side. And the reason given for it is a small marvel of careful, observant, and entirely mistaken medieval logic. The liver, they held, was the great furnace of the body, a hot and a fiery organ, and the liver sat on the right side. The stomach lay above it and a little to the left. So if you slept upon your right side, the hot liver was brought up snugly beneath the stomach, lending its warmth upward through the night to help cook and concoct the waiting food, exactly like setting a cooking pot down directly over the glowing coals rather than off to one cold side of the hearth. Then, once that first long portion of the night had done its proper work of digestion, you were to turn over onto your left side for the second part of the night, easing now the stomach that had been emptied of its work, and perhaps, toward the grey of dawn, turning back once more onto the right. So a careful sleeper of the age went to bed with a kind of plan, a route to be travelled through the night, right then left, then right, each turn a small, deliberate act of medicine performed in the dark. You did not simply flop down and sleep however your body fell. You composed yourself, you arranged yourself, You set yourself upon your right side with intent, the way you might take a dose of something, trusting that the night would do its quiet work on the food and the humours if only you gave it the proper position to work in. To lie all night long flat upon your back was held to be the very worst thing of all, a standing invitation to bad dreams, to the room flooding back into the head, even, the most fearful warned, to the Mare itself coming to settle upon the open and the undefended chest. I will not stand here and pretend to you that any of this was correct, because of course it was not. The liver does not warm the stomach. Sleep does not cook your dinner in the dark. And you may lie tonight in any way that pleases you without unbalancing a single one of your humours, for the plain reason that there are no humours and never were. And yet there is something almost touching in all of it. This careful, this patient, this closely observant and yet wholly mistaken little science of the night, watching real things with real attention, noticing that people did seem to sleep better propped up, that a heavy meal did sit ill in the belly, that the body does have its own rhythms across the long hours of a night, and then reaching for explanation with the only tools that the whole age possessed. It is the easiest thing in the world to smile gently at the hot liver and the cooking stomach, but strip away the wrong machinery underneath it, and what is left standing is people paying close and serious and loving attention to how they slept, and trying earnestly to sleep a little better, which is precisely and exactly what you yourself were doing when you opened this video tonight and lay down to listen. The questions have not changed in the least across all those long centuries. Only the answers have. I will add only this one thing more, and only in a single passing breath, because another whole night belongs to it and not this one, that some among both the learned and the common folk took their night not in one single unbroken stretch of sleep, but in two soft stages, with a wakeful candlelit hush somewhere in the middle of it. But that is a whole long story entirely of its own, and it is not for tonight. And so, having lain ourselves down and warmed the cold bed and put out the small flame and propped ourselves up against the great bolster, having said the prayers against the Mare and against the walking dead, having done all the many things that a medieval night quietly required of a sleeper, we come at the very last to the far shore of that night, to the waking. For most people there was no clock to obey and no bell that was theirs to answer, and there was most certainly no alarm shrilling and buzzing on a table beside the bed at an hour chosen the night before. You woke instead the way the body and the wide world together woke you. You woke by the thin grey light coming grudgingly in through the cracks and chinks of the shutter, by the cock crowing in the yard, loud and certain and pleased with itself in the half-dark, by the cold, as the very last warmth of the banked night gave quietly out, by the small hard fist of a hungry child pressed against you, or the stirring and shifting of all the others in the crowded bed, or the simple flat pressure of a day's work that would not wait much longer to be done, by the bell of the parish church away across the fields, calling the faithful to the first prayers of the morning, drifting in faint over the cottages. You did not choose the hour of your waking the way you choose it now, setting a number the night before and being torn out of sleep by it on the dot. You woke when the world woke you, and the world woke you gently, by degrees, with light and cold and small sounds, so that the morning did not jolt you out of the dark, but drew you slowly up out of it, the way a tide lifts a beached boat. There is no shrill alarm in this waking, no snooze, no bright screen thrust into your eyes before your mind has surfaced. There is only the grey light growing, and the cock, and the cold, and the slow, honest return of the day. And the waking, just exactly like the sleeping that went before it, was sorted out neatly by rank. The great lady woke in her curtained bed to the quiet hand of a servant, drawing back the heavy hangings and letting in the first careful grey light. a fire already coaxed up and crackling, warmed water carried in, the long, slow ceremony of the day's dressing about to begin again. The poor woke already half-dressed, in the very same shirt that they had slept in, and rose straight up into the cold morning with no ceremony of any kind at all. The pallet to be rolled and stowed, the fire to be woken before anything else in the world could happen. Down in the great hall, the sleeping men were already stirring on the floor, and soon enough the trestle boards would go back up onto their legs, and the wide dormitory would become a dining room once more. Out on the road, the weary traveller woke beside the snoring stranger, checked first of all that his purse was still knotted safe where he had left it against his hip, and made himself ready to ride on. A whole society, all of it, from the deep feather bed in the solar down to the bare floor of the hall, crossing back together over the very same threshold at much the same grey hour, up and out of the dangerous dark country of the night, and into the plain ordinary safety of the day. And there is a feeling in that first waking that we have very nearly lost entirely, you and I would like to leave it gently with you tonight. For them, to wake at all was to have survived. To open your eyes upon the grey morning light was to have crossed the whole of the dark, past the Mare, and past the restless dead, and past the long total blackness, and to have come out the far side of it into another given day. The terror by night had not taken you after all. The thing on the chest had not come, or it had come and gone again and left you breathing. The dead had stayed down quiet in their graves. There was a deep, quiet, unspoken relief in the simple bare fact of the morning. A relief that you and I no longer feel and barely understand, because we no longer fear the dark in the bone-deep way that they so reasonably feared it. You and I wake faintly annoyed at the alarm. They woke quietly grateful at the light. And perhaps, drifting now toward your own sleep, with no Mare to fear tonight, and no walking dead in the lane, and a soft and safe bed beneath you that no will need ever mention by name, you might gently borrow just a little of that old and honest gratitude for the simple, undeserved, ordinary gift of a night safely crossed and a quiet morning that comes. Now, with the night, your body grows heavier. The questions all grow quiet. The straw and the rope and the great curtained bed, the family folded warm in their hollow and the servant asleep on the floor, and the stranger breathing in the crowded inn, all of them grow distant now and soft, like figures seen across a wide field at dusk. The medieval world, with all of its fears and its prayers and its small flames carefully put out against the dark, drifts gently and entirely away from you, and what remains behind is only calm. You have no Mare to fear tonight, and no walking dead out in the lane, and no rope beneath you to tighten, and no last small light whose snuffing you must dread. You are warm enough, you are safe enough, you are tired enough. The dark tonight is only dark, and it is kind, and it asks nothing more of you now than to let yourself go down into it. All the long ladder of beds we climbed tonight, the straw and the rope and the feathers, the cottage and the hall and the inn and the curtained chamber, every one of them was only ever a way of doing the thing you are doing right now, of laying a tired body down in the dark and trusting the night to give it back in the morning. And so the long story of the medieval night closes, the way every single night they ever crossed closed in the end, gently, into rest. The darkness folds itself around you like another soft blanket drawn up over the first. The quiet holds you the way the curtained bed once held its sleeper, and the warmth holds you the way the crowded family bed once held the small child safe in its middle. You have done all that the night requires of you. You may lay it down now. rest now, as they once did, wrapped warm against the dark and carried gently down into sleep. Sweet dreams.